Hello and welcome to the 12th episode of the Green Bean podcast. My name is Katie. This is my little friend Jack, and we're recording this in my studio, which is in South Devon in the UK. This is a podcast about my creative practice, which includes drawing and knitting and sewing. And I also take you out on some walks in the countryside around where we live. So this is a usual episode in some ways and an unusual episode in other ways. I've got drawing, knitting and sewing to share with you, but it might feel a little bit bitty because I've been recording segments on and off over the last couple of weeks as I've been working really hard to get my new zine, the Green Bean, out to the printers. If you haven't been watching frequently, you might not know about the Green Bean. It's a, how do I describe it? I should get better at this. It's a self-published magazine that I used to publish when I first started working as an artist 9 years ago. And at this point, I haven't published one for 5 years. I took a career break, if you like, for various reasons. I'll tell the story of that one day, but not today. So this issue of the Green Bean that I've been working on and am about to publish is something that feels really special to me, to finally be putting it back out into the world after a 5-year break. So I'm really excited to share that with you. So I've got some drawing that I've been doing for that. I've also been designing a knitting pattern which will be in the zine, so I'll show you my work in progress on that. And I've got a couple of embroidery and sewing patterns in there as well that I've been working on. But before I get into the main content of the episode, I've got a couple of things I wanted to chat to you about. The first one is something confusing that I said last episode, in episode 11. And it's not a big deal, but I don't like to say things that people interpret incorrectly. So what happened, if you watched the last episode, you will have enjoyed the scene where I was working on my sewing machine and Jack was sitting on my lap, and I put some text on the screen that said that my partner was playing the guitar in the background, which is true, but also I used some of Will McNichol's guitar music as the music that kind of went over that section of film. And what I completely didn't realise is that people would assume that the guitar music in the background that they could hear was the guitar music that I could hear while I was recording, and the assumption was that Will McNichol, whose lovely guitar music I use on this podcast, is my partner, which is not correct. Sorry about that. My partner does also play the guitar, sadly not quite that well. And what happens when I record those bits of film of me sewing or knitting, sewing particularly because I'm working on the machine, I actually cut out the sound and then I put the music on top in editing. So sorry for anyone who was confused and thought that Will was my partner. He is not. He's just an artist that I sort of know through a friend of a friend, and when I decided that I wanted to make this podcast, I thought that his music would be perfect. So I contacted him and asked if he'd be willing to let me use it. And he very kindly said yes, but he's not my partner. I hope that's cleared that up for everybody. Jack is just growling at a van that drove past outside the window. The second thing that I want to mention before we get into the podcast proper is that I've been doing this for a year. And I can't quite believe that. It's been a really, really busy year for me personally. I've experienced lots of change, and I think actually it started with recording my first podcast. So I released my first episode just before Edinburgh Yarn Festival last year. I believe the date that it was published was the 10th of March, but I haven't checked that. So it's very close to being a year since I put that first episode out into the world. And I think it really started to change things for me. So I had been having this break from making artwork full time. I was doing other things with my life. And I wanted to be honest and share what my experience was of fitting my artwork into my spare time and having a full-time job and what it is to be a creative person and balance those things. And obviously you'll know if you've watched the podcast for a while that I left my full-time job in October last year to focus on my artwork full-time again, which was a wonderful decision for me. I'm so glad that I made that choice and decided to take a step forward with my creative work again. But I don't think I would have done it if I hadn't started this podcast. I think that sitting down in front of the camera and putting my voice out into the world again gave me so much confidence. And part of what's given me confidence is the way that you've received the podcast. So I really wanted to say thank you if you're someone who's watched the podcast a couple of times or every time since the first episode. You've given me so much support and encouragement to follow my creative work and what I want to be doing. So thank you. I think that's enough. I'm going to get emotional if I carry on. So let's take you for a walk down to my favourite beach here in Devon. And it was very much this beach that inspired the theme of the green bean issue that I've been working on. The theme of the issue is rock pools, and it's very much inspired by the creatures and the wildlife that lives in rock pools on the British seaside. So it only seemed fitting to take a walk down to my favourite beach to share with you in this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Today I am going to be drawing the very last page of the new Green Bean Zine, and for those of you who've been following the podcast since the beginning, you will know that I've been working on this project over a year, and if you've been following my work longer than that, you will know that I've been working on this project for actually 5 years. It's a long story why it's taken so long. I'll talk about that another time, I think. But for those who don't know, The Green Bean is a zine that I started producing when I first started working as an illustrator in 2010. And I self-published it every couple of months or so for the first few years of my career. And then because of other commitments, time commitments to my book and various other projects, I had to stop making it. And I always intended for it to come back, and I never quite intended it to be such a long wait for the next issue. So I'm really, really excited that I've almost finished. I can't say I've finished because I've got this one page left to do, but it feels like a huge victory over a difficult few years to have reached the point where I can finish and self-publish a project. I'm very close to having a finished object in my hands. So I'm really, really excited. The page that I have left to draw is a single page. I normally, when I'm working on the Green Bean, I work in double page spreads. So I think about how the zine is going to look when you open those pages flat. And I think in 2 pages at a time. But what happened is when I was writing up the instructions for one of the craft projects, I couldn't squish them all into a double page, so I ended up overflowing one page to make the instructions clear and make sense. So I had this one page left over that needed filling, and I decided what I would fill it with was the life cycle of a sea anemone, which is one of my favourite animals to watch in rock pools. So it's fitting for the rock pool theme of the new issue, and that's what I'm going to be drawing. So I thought you'd enjoy watching some of the process of the last page of the green bean come together. The way that I'm working on this drawing is the way that I normally work on a pencil drawing, because I'm using very soft pencils. So I've got a 2B, a 4B and a 6B. They've got a huge tendency to smudge, obviously, when I'm drawing and sliding my hand across the paper. So what I need to do is start from the top left of my page and work my way down to the bottom left, so that my hand is never covering a part of the drawing that I've finished, but it's always kind of working towards a piece of the drawing that's not done yet, and that stops me from smudging my work as I go. And I think I've mentioned before on the podcast that I find the need to work in this way really helpful, because it means that I can't leave those bits of the drawing that are more difficult because I want to avoid them, that I have to face them straight away in order to not smudge them later. So it's a much more systematic way of working than I would choose if left to my own devices. I would definitely do all the easy bits first and leave all the hard bits till last. While I work on my sea anemone, I thought I would chat to you a little bit about how I got into self-publishing. For those of you who don't know, self-publishing is when an author, writer, illustrator, anybody really decides to put a piece of work out into the world without the help of a professional publisher or some kind of organisation that does the distribution and the promotion for them. So basically it means that you decide you want to create something, you pay for the printing, and you organise how you're going to either sell or give away your product. It's something I sort of started doing by accident. I never really thought of it as a big thing, I'm going to try and do self-publishing. It wasn't really like that. So I've always known from a very young age that I wanted to make books. There are collections of small stapled comics that I made when I was 5, 6, 7 that my parents still have. I've been putting my own books together for a very long time. So it made sense that when I was at art college, it was bookmaking that I was focused on. And in particular, I was working on a recipe book. I was vegan at the time. I'm not vegan anymore. But I was feeling a distinct lack of cake in my life. And I was working up some recipes for vegan cakes, and I decided to make it one of my college projects to illustrate this recipe book that I was working on. And people kept asking me for my recipes. So it seemed like the obvious thing to do when I had the recipe book finished was to get a print run of these books made and sell them to people. So obviously it cost me quite a lot of money for the print run. I think I had 100 copies made. I just phoned a few printing companies, got a quote that seemed reasonable to me. Reasonable meaning I could inflate the price enough to make a profit on it when I sold it. I just sent the files off and got a box of books back a few weeks later. I was lucky that I didn't really have a problem selling that first 100 copies, and if I'd wanted to, I would have had the money to invest in a second print run, but I decided not to. If you want to get into the really long and complicated details of why I made that decision, it's because I was working on my graphic novel, which is a memoir of recovery from an eating disorder, and I was very aware that part of my choice to be vegan was a way of still exerting some kind of control over what I was eating. It was a leftover from my eating disorder. So it didn't feel right for me to publish a book about my recovery and at the same time have a recipe book in the world that was made during a time when my lifestyle and my recovery was not ideal. I don't know if I'm not explaining that very well, but I'm doing my best. Anyway, I decided that that book should stay out of print for a while. So I did. For a short while after it sold out, I made it available as PDF. And then I decided, actually, I don't want this to be in the public domain at the same time as my graphic memoir about recovery. So I took it out. But what it did was it gave me a taste for publishing things myself. And it never occurred to me to try and look for a publisher for that recipe book. It just didn't feel like the right thing to do. I didn't have time to invest in writing to publishers. I didn't have an agent. I didn't have any of the things that you're supposed to do if you want to publish a book. It seemed quicker and easier just to get a small print run myself and sell it myself. So that's what I did. And it sort of gave me a taste for self-publishing, and I think it's what made me decide to do the same thing with the zine. I first came across zines. Oh crumbs, I don't even know where I first came across zines. But what I can tell you about is the first book that inspired me to make zines. It's a book called Whatcha, What's a Zine? And I'm going to put the link down below. And it just opened my eyes to what zines were, what zines could be. And reading that book, I felt so inspired to create my own magazine, which I had always wanted to do, and I suddenly felt, well, why shouldn't I do it? And very quickly after reading that book, I got started on making the first green bean. That was in 2010. And I've always felt that the green bean is at the centre of my practice as an artist. And so a part of that is that the green bean actually changes. It changes significantly in terms of its themes, and obviously it's changed significantly in the 9 years since the first one that I made. But it's very much a safe place for me to experiment, try different things out, express what I'm learning and what I'm passionate about at the moment. So you know that I'm very much into biology and natural history. For those of you who are new to the podcast, I do have a biology degree as well. That's my educational background. So I have a real passion for that, and it's crept into the green bean a little bit. But this issue in particular, which focuses on rock pools, has very much a natural history kind of theme to it. And I love the freedom of self-publishing in that this particular version of the green bean can be about rock pools, but some of the past ones have been about Lego or tea parties or vegetables, all kinds of different themes, and it doesn't matter. You know, the unifying thing is my voice and what I'm exploring in my personal work at that time. And I love having the creative freedom to do a project like that and not have to worry too much about the audience or whether it's going to sell, because it's not a huge risk. I will get a print run done, and it will obviously cost me an outlay of money, but I'm not asking somebody else to take that risk for me, I guess. I'm not asking somebody else to say, we think we can sell 30,000 copies of this around the world. I'm just saying, I've got a few hundred followers who I think maybe some of them might like to read this. And that's something really lovely. It's like a small scale way of producing. I know how the book is produced, which is something else I really like. So I'm going to print my zine. It's maybe glamorizing it a little bit to call it a book. I'm going to print my zine on 100% recycled paper with a local company here in Devon. So I know how it's been made and who's been involved in its production, because it's mostly been me. And that's something I really value as well in creating a product that's completely unique and handmade.
So today I am working on a second sock actually. It's a new project to the podcast, but it doesn't feel new to me. I've been working on it for quite some time. It's a design project. So it started as a sketch and then as a swatch, and then now it exists as a sock, and I'm just working up the second sample. It is a pattern that is going to be published in the green bean. Certainly evolving theme to this episode is the green bean for sure. So I wanted to create a sock that was inspired by the seaside and rock pool theme of the green bean, and I picked cockles as my inspiration just because I liked the name of the pattern. Cockle Socks I thought was cute, so that's the name I went for, and I designed with that as a starting point. So I'm just going to pop this down and show you the finished sock, because I knit my stranded colourwork inside out, so you can't really see what's going on here. But here I can show you the first sock, which is finished. So it's got a picot edge at the top, which is a nice, like a turned over hem, so it gives a neat finish at the top. Then a little row of lace, as if a frilly edge wasn't pretty enough. And then some colourwork shells, they go all around the cuff. And then a wave pattern that continues down to the toe. It's got a classic heel flap and gusset, although I did something a little bit different with the gusset decreases, which I quite like. Normally people place the decreases here at the edge of the heel, so you will get a diagonal line going here. I prefer to place the gusset decreases next to the sole, so it gives this straight line of the sole pattern. You can see that the sole of the sock has a cute pattern going on. And then it has a barn toe, which is my absolute favourite way of finishing a toe. I learned it from Kate Atherley, and it's my favourite because it doesn't involve any grafting, Kitchener stitch. You just decrease until you have 8 or 10 stitches left, and then, like the top of a hat, you thread the yarn through, pull it tight, and you're done. No messing around. So it makes socks even more friendly as a travel project. Now, that said, I'm not actually much of a sock knitter, but it turns out I really love designing socks. I kind of like the shape as a canvas. I like that there's not a huge variation in shape for different sizes, so you can grade it up, and the ankle and the foot are going to be the same size in most cases. You might want to add a few extra stitches or take away a few if you're doing some special stitch pattern, but generally the shape is pretty basic, and I love that blank canvas for putting a design onto. I also love wearing colourwork socks. Obviously stranded colourwork gives you a double thickness fabric with all the floats on the back. Don't look at the fact that I haven't woven my ends in yet. The photo shoot isn't until tomorrow. So yeah, I'm really getting into knitting stranded colourwork socks, and I feel like this is the year when it's time for me to face my fears about knitting socks, because I've got loads of garments now. I still have gaps in my wardrobe that I'd like to fill, but definitely socks is something that I'm having issues with. In case I think I haven't mentioned it before actually, that I, a couple of years ago, once my sewing and my knitting got to a point where I could actually make things that I wanted to wear, I decided I was no longer going to buy ready-to-wear items unless I was buying them from a charity shop. And I haven't really taken it as a big deal. It's just something that's important to me. I'm not making a fuss about it, but it does mean as things are starting to wear out that I'm not looking to go to a shop and replace them with something that I can buy easily. I'm thinking about making them. With jumpers, great. With dresses, great. It's a little bit more tricky when it comes to things like socks and, dare I mention it, underwear. Haven't got anywhere near underwear sewing yet, and that's going to be something that comes later, I think. But socks, I think I can start working on filling my sock drawer with hand knitted socks, and maybe even get to enjoy knitting them. I don't know. We'll see. Now, I'm not 100% confident in my ability to knit colourwork without a chart and to chat to the camera at the same time. So it might be that one of those things suffers at the expense of the other. We'll have to see how we go. I don't have the chart because this is now at a very intuitive stage of the colourwork. I kind of know what I'm doing. I've just got one more gusset decrease to work, and then I'm straight going until the toes. So I can look at the row before and figure out what happens next. In theory, anyway. We'll see if I can manage that. While I do it, I wanted to chat to you about the yarn that I've chosen for this project, because it's really quite special, and I was really excited to have the chance to work with it. So it's from a small company called Black Isle Yarns, which is run by Julie. The Black Isle is just north of Inverness in the Scottish Highlands. It is actually a place I visited a couple of years ago. It's really beautiful. So it's nice to pick a yarn that is connected to a place that I have memories of visiting. Julie sources all of her fibre locally to her, directly from the farmers, and then she sends the fleeces to be processed into yarns. She's got quite a variety of different bases. She does some lovely undyed blends of, really unusual blends, really nice products. And she also does plant dyeing. And one of the shades, the purple that I've chosen here, is one of her plant dyed colours. It's been dyed with oak galls and logwood to give this lovely purple colour. The white is undyed. So the base that I've chosen, sorry, I'm hesitating because I'm already not quite sure what I'm doing. Oh, it's okay, we haven't gone wrong, I've just forgotten. The base that I've chosen is Julie's no nylon sock base, which is called Killen. And so it's a blend of 80% Blueface Leicester wool and 20% white mohair. So Blueface Leicester is a long wool breed, and mohair is known as nature's nylon, again because it has long, strong fibres. So the idea is that this can create a strong, tough sock yarn without having to put plastic in, which I don't know. I'm not hugely averse to having nylon in sock yarn, but if there are options that enable me to choose something that's all natural and biodegradable, then I'm interested, and I definitely want to do some experimenting. So I picked Julie's no nylon sock yarn because it's beautiful. It's gloriously soft and fluffy. It's worsted spun, but it still has that kind of fluffy halo, which I really love in stranded colourwork. It really kind of blends together and makes the design look smooth rather than pixelated. Do you know what I mean? So I love that about it, and because of the lustrous fibres, it's got this really subtle kind of pearly sheen to it, which really lends itself to my shell theme for these socks. It's just a really beautiful yarn, and I hope that if you decide to knit the socks, you might decide to work with Julie's yarn as well. It's such a treat. It's spun in a small mill in the Scottish Borders, and you can kind of tell it's a small batch handmade product. There's little bits of grass in the yarn that you come across now and then. Occasionally the texture's a little bit uneven, and again, that's something that I really like. You can tell that you're working with a product that people have handled, that's not just mass produced in a enormous factory somewhere that we don't know. It's Julie really has that connection to the sheep and the farmers and the mill that she works with. I really love it. And to top it off, it's a beautiful yarn as well. I have two different sewing projects to share with you in this episode, although they're both on a theme. And neither of them are dressmaking. Both of them are small craft sewing projects that are going to be included in the green bean. Yes, I'm still going on about the green bean. So if you've been watching the podcast for a while, you will have seen my oyster catcher cushion before, and I really just knuckled down in the last few weeks and finished it. It's been one of those projects that I've really loved working on when I've worked on it, but for some reason there's always been something that has seemed like it was more appealing to do or more urgent to do, so I ended up knitting rather than sewing on that project, and it got left for a long time. So as I was aiming to have the green bean finished for this month, I really decided it's time to focus and get on with that embroidery project. So I used time in the evenings that I otherwise would have spent knitting, working on embroidering that cushion. And in the end, I really enjoyed it. There's something about embroidery that's really quite similar to knitting. I think that it gives you that kind of soothing, monotonous motion of moving the needle in and out of the fabric that's certainly for me, it seems to help me to relax. So once I got going with the project, I really got into it. And I have the finished cushion to show you. Yeah, it's really exciting to see something come to fruition that I've been working on for such a long time. Obviously, it hasn't taken me a year, but I've been working on this project over the course of a year, so to see it finally finished and become something I'm really proud of is great. So let me give you a tour. So on the front of the cushion we've got all of the pebbles, and the main body of the oyster catcher are pure wool felt, which I've sewn on, and then I added these details to the rocks in embroidery, and the same with the beak and the eye and the feet of the oyster catcher. On the back is an oyster catcher print fabric which I designed. I created this print from one of my oyster catcher illustrations, and I've actually put this fabric up on Spoonflower now, so it's not just me who can have it, but other people can have it too. And I decided that a contrasting red zip would be the cutest thing to pop in the back here, and I really like how that picks up the red of the beak and the legs in the oyster catchers on the back and on the front as well. And the final thing to mention that I'm really, really proud of is this black piping around the edge. I have never put piping in anything before, and I think there's really nothing better when you're
trying to write instructions for something is actually being a learner yourself, because you understand, you know, the things that are difficult. You're not writing instructions as though you're an old hand at it and you assume a certain level of knowledge. But it's really the first time I've made piping, so I tried to make the instructions clear enough for someone who's not done piping before. I was very pleased that it was not as difficult as I thought, especially getting these curved corners. I really thought that that might be tricky and look a mess, but in the end it doesn't look too bad and I'm pretty pleased with it. Not quite sure what I'm going to do with the finished cushion. We tend to have functional furnishings in this house because we have a small dog, and this is a little bit too precious, I think, to put on the sofa where the dog might sit on it. So I'm not sure. I think I might end up giving it as a gift to someone in my family, but I'm really, really pleased with how it turned out, and obviously I took it down to the beach to take some photos of it. The other sewing project I've been working on has also involved a little bit of embroidery. So I took one of the drawings of seashells that I had drawn for earlier in the green bean and I enlarged it and transferred it onto a piece of linen fabric to do some embroidery. The product I used to transfer it has the most ridiculous name. And I came across the product because my friend Molly, who has the Wild Olive blog and is an embroidery designer, she uses it for transferring her work onto fabric, and as far as I'm concerned she's the pinnacle of embroidery knowledge, so if she uses a product it must be good. And I gave this thing a try and I wasn't disappointed, even though it's called Sulky Sticky Fabry Solvy, which must be the worst product name I've ever heard in my life. Nonetheless, it's a brilliant product. So what you do, you can draw onto it. It feels like fabric. You take it out of the packet, it feels like fabric, and you can draw your design onto it. You can also put it through a home printer. So if you're not confident drawing or tracing, you can actually print the design directly from your computer onto this water-soluble fabric. I don't know if I said that already. So then you cut your design out, so you make a little sticker basically, peel the backing off and stick it onto your fabric. And then you pop your fabric into your embroidery hoop and do your work stitching over the lines that you've drawn on this soluble fabric. And that's it, it's as simple as that. So it gives you a line to follow when you're stitching, and it also it helps to stabilize the fabric as well. If you're using a fabric that's a little bit fine or delicate, then it adds an extra layer to keep it sturdy while you're sewing it. And then what happens when you've finished embroidering your design is you simply soak it in water, you leave it for a few minutes, and the sulky sticky Fabri-Solvi dissolves away. Now in the case of the embroidery that I did, it was quite a close design, so I had to work my fingers into it a little bit in order to get all of the soluble fabric to disappear. But yeah, it just dissolves into the water and is no more. I am slightly concerned about what that means environmentally. I don't know. I assume that the product is made of some kind of plastic. So I definitely want to do some research and find out exactly what it's made of and what potential effect that might have on the environment before it becomes a staple product that I want to use all the time. I definitely want to give that some thought because I'm not entirely convinced it's environmentally friendly. So I just wanted to mention that because I don't know at this stage what the product is made of. So I want to look into that. But yeah, once the embroidery is on the fabric, then I went about turning the fabric into this little bag. It's just a really simple drawstring project bag or shell collecting bag, which is what I had in mind for it. At the moment it's got my Cockle Socks inside from my visit to the beach where I photographed everything. So at the bottom it has a piece of shell fabric. Again, it's the fabric that I designed. I just want to say a few quick words in praise of Spoonflower and how liberating it is to be a freelance designer in 2019, to be able to come up with a repeating print of your own design and simply send it off and have a fabric made in a small piece, a big piece, or a humongous piece. You know, 15, 20 years ago even, that wouldn't have been a possibility for an independent designer to produce fabric from their work. So it's incredible to have that opportunity. If you haven't come across Spoonflower, it's a amazing and dangerous website if you like fabric. Basically it's a platform where designers can upload their unique designs, and if they choose to, they can make them available for sale to the public as well. So it's a great platform and I'm really enjoying playing with it and making my own fabrics for the first time. So this at the bottom is on both sides. That's the fabric that I designed. It's just a cotton. This is the black linen that I used with the embroidery on it, and then just some cotton piping cord to draw the bag together. It's not lined. It's a really, really simple sewing project. It would definitely be a good first sewing project if you're not the most confident sewer. So yeah, those are the two sewing projects that are going to be in the green bean, and I definitely feel like I've got a bit of a taste for embroidery, although I am feeling that I want to get back to a bit of garment sewing, so perhaps you'll see some embroidery cropping up on some of my future garment projects. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the Green Bean Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed seeing what I've been up to, and I've certainly enjoyed taking you to my favourite beach. If you want to keep up with me between now and the next episode, my handle on social media is Katie Greenbean, and the best place to find me is Instagram, because actually that's the only one that I use. I'm also reasonable at Ravelry, but Instagram is the best place to find me. If you want to support the podcast, we have a page on Patreon, which is patreon.com/Katie Greenbean. You can access various different benefits there if you're interested or able to financially support the podcast. I very much appreciate it. A little bit of news before I go. So I know lots of you are involved in the knitting community and are either coming or feeling sad about not coming to Edinburgh Yarn Festival, which is coming up at the end of March. In case you didn't know already, I am going to be having a pop-up stand at Edinburgh Yarn Festival. I'm going to be there on all 3 days of the main festival and the Sunday, selling some of my illustrated work. I'll be selling my sheep breeds poster, which you saw me working on in the last episode, and a few other things. I'm hesitant to announce what the things are because they haven't arrived with me yet, and I don't want to talk about a product that potentially won't arrive in time in case people get excited about it and then it actually arrives late and I can't have it. So what I'll say is, if you're interested in finding out what I'm going to have, keep up with me on Instagram, and that's where I'll share the products as they arrive with me, so I know that I am going to have them there. One thing I am certainly going to have is the new issue of the Green Bean, because I've just sent that to the printers, which is so exciting. I can't really quite believe that I've managed to do it after 5 years of trying and not managing. So I got it all together. I sent it to the printers yesterday, so that will be coming with me to Edinburgh. And everything that I take with me to Edinburgh will be going online in my Etsy shop afterwards. So don't feel like I'm making things that are exclusively for Edinburgh Yarn Festival and you're going to miss out if you can't make it or you've never even heard of it and don't know what it's all the fuss is about. Don't worry, everything's going to be available on Etsy afterwards. If you can't wait until then, what I have done is made all of the back issues of the Green Bean, so the ones I made between 2010 and 2014, available as digital downloads on Etsy, and there are very few paper copies left at the time of recording. Possibly they might have gone, but at the time of recording there's a few paper copies left and all of the digital issues available to download in my Etsy shop. What I will say is, please bear in mind that they were made by Katie 5 to 9 years ago. When I look at them, I very much see that my work has progressed since then, which is a great thing to see. You know, that's what we're always striving for as artists and as people, I think, is to improve upon what we've done before and grow and develop. So I'm glad to see that. But I also feel like, oh, that's not quite as good as it could be, or I'd like to redraw that, or, you know. But I also think there's value in presenting things as they were. And I know a lot of people have been asking me for access to the former issues of the Green Bean, so I'm really pleased to have been able to get my act together and make those available for you as well. That's it, I think. I'll just finish by saying thank you again for your support of the podcast over the past year. I've really enjoyed the process of learning how to do this and getting comfortable sitting in front of the camera. And it seems like you've enjoyed watching me too, but I think that you might just have enjoyed getting to know Jack. And that's fine, because Jack seems to quite enjoy podcasting too. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time, if not in Edinburgh. Take care. Bye.